Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Yana Johnson, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Warrant Officer Class 1 Kim Owen. We warmly welcome the family of Trooper Lewis John Greay, whose story will be told shortly. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths of floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Trooper Lewis John Greay. Lewis Greay was born in 1895 in Albany, Western Australia, the eldest son of William and Agnes Greay. He grew up in the Woodanelling district north of Albany, attending the local school, and was described as very popular in the district and a fine stamp of a young fellow. Lewis enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force in October 1914 and in February 1915 embarked from Fremantle for the First World War. He joined the 10th Light Horse Regiment and after a brief period of training in Egypt, sailed for Gallipoli, where he arrived in mid-May. Due to the conditions on the Gallipoli Peninsula, Lewis and his Light Horse Regiment served dismounted during the Dardanelles campaign. In August, Lewis and the 10th Light Horse took part in the tragic charge on the Neck, ordered to assault Turkish positions that dominated the Australian lines below. After a brief and largely ineffective bombardment, Australian troops jumped out of their trenches into waiting Turkish machine guns. Lewis and his regiment formed the third wave of the Australian attack and suffered terrible casualties. Lewis survived the Neck and weeks later took part in the bloody and confused action at Hill 60, the last major offensive on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The attacks on Hill 60 were conducted in order to widen the area of land captured by Allied forces between Anzac Cove and British forces at Suvla Bay. The first attempt, which began on the 21st of August, was partially successful, and Australian, New Zealand, British and Indian forces captured a foothold on the hill. In the renewed assault the next day, raw Australian troops again made a push but were forced back by the Turkish defences. On the 27th of August, Lewis's regiment took part in a renewed assault on Hill 60. An artillery bombardment began at 4 p.m. and continued for an hour before the attack began. The assault drew immediate and heavy machine gun, rifle and shrapnel fire from the Turkish positions. The battle raged for 3 days, during which time the objective was taken, partially lost, then partially retaken by the Allied assault. Lewis then remained on the Gallipoli Peninsula until the cold and wintry evacuation of Anzac forces in December 1915. Back in Egypt, Lewis served as a signaller in his unit, which formed part of the Anzac Mounted Division. The men worked with the British to defend the Suez Canal from Turkish advances across the Sinai Peninsula, conducting patrols of the desert and occasional raids on Turkish positions. Lewis's first major action in Egypt occurred in the Battle of Romani in August 1916. Australian, New Zealand and British forces had occupied the town of Romani since April 1916 and had used the town as a base to conduct patrols and disrupt Turkish access to the Suez Canal. In late July, reconnaissance aircraft reported a force of up to 14,000 Turkish soldiers forming nearby. The battle began at about midnight on the 3rd of August, when Australian forces, who were moving into position to set a defence of the town, unexpectedly ran into advancing Turkish troops. 500 Australian rifles were pitted against up to 8,000 Turkish soldiers. Anzac and British forces were initially pushed back, but after the arrival of reinforcements, were able to defend and eventually push forward. Lewis and the 3rd Light Horse Brigade became involved in the battle on the 5th of August, when they took part in a counter-attack that broke the Turkish lines. In September 1916, the 3rd Light Horse Brigade was in the process of returning from a patrol when it stopped and made camp at Hod Amara, to the east of Salmanah. The group came under enemy machine gun fire that killed one man and one horse. Lewis Greay was that man. He was 21 years old. His comrades buried him and gave a service on a rise about 270 metres east of Salmanna. However, as the survivors moved on, the exact location of his grave was lost and his body has never been found. Today, his name is listed on the Jerusalem Memorial, which commemorates the names of 3,300 Commonwealth servicemen who died in the fighting in Egypt and Palestine in the First World War, who have no known grave. Lewis's death was deeply felt in his local community back home. Friends of the family wrote in the local newspaper that he nobly rose to his country's call. He gave his best, his life, his all. Trooper Lewis John Greay is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, amongst almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Trooper Lewis John Greay, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading the oath and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We'll leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere, or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they'll be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and we wish you all a very good evening.